This is episode 67 of Standing Out. Standing Out is a remarkable interview style podcast with the intention to highlight women and men making outstanding contributions in their field. This podcast is generously sponsored by Think Global. Think Global is a business advisory firm working with women entrepreneurs around the globe to scale their businesses to the next level. Today, I'd like to welcome Michael Tobolski. As the Director of Corporate Relations for WEConnect International, Michael's focus is business development, corporate member relations, and the support of strategic planning, finance, and operations. His prior corporate experience includes Marriott International as Senior Director of Supplier Diversity, where he developed Marriott's formal supplier program and began the global supplier diversity journey. Other positions with Marriott included Hotel Controller, Director of Purchasing, and Food and Beverage Director. Michael also worked at Walt Disney World, where he oversaw food and beverage operations in several of the resorts and hotels. Michael, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Katrina.
How did you go from sort of an operational role into supplier diversity?
Well, you never know how life works with the twists and turns. I had done a lot of work. I actually left Marriott for a period of time to start my own restaurant company. So I had done that and moved to Disney, and then I was looking to come back into Marriott Resorts and got involved in purchasing again. The hotel that I was working at actually had supplier diversity goals with the city of Philadelphia. It was a convention center hotel. And so I learned about this, and so I thought, well, we just need to own this. So I took charge of it and exceeded the city's expectations. A few years later, I was asked to come back to the corporate office to work on a project. And after that was complete, they asked me to say, well, I've worked in hotels, I've been in purchasing, I've did a great job with the supplier diversity efforts with the city. Would I be interested in spearheading their supplier diversity program? So I got involved in that aspect. And, you know, a lot of times supplier diversity professionals have to know how procurement works, how the organizations function, how to get buy-in from all the different levels. So I had been exposed to all the different dimensions, and I think that contributed to me getting involved in the supplier diversity. And then I found out what a great position to be in, because not only do you help the company, you help the communities where the businesses operate. And then beyond the U.S., there's opportunities around the world to make this work. So it all kind of led from one thing to the next.
Isn't it interesting? I personally have what I would consider a nonlinear path, but when you look back on it, it's like, oh, all those decisions led up to this point, and now it all makes sense. When you're starting a supplier diversity program, how do you go about that? Because us as diverse vendors, we always wonder, like, what goes into that as far as creating it, because it's so much more than just a database where people put their information, right?
Well, you know, you have to look at the holistic approach about diversity and inclusion. And many corporations, if not all that are global, have a D&I policy that's global, but it's just usually focused on HR. And it needs to extend beyond that to include the supply chains and in diversity and inclusion and wherever you're operating around the world. So you really have to have the buy-in. I think one of the drivers is a lot of the corporations, you know, I worked at Marriott for a number of years, and so we had contracts with IBM and other large corporations where they asked us to support their programs with supplier diversity efforts. So a lot of corporations are driving other corporations to help do this within the U.S. Hopefully the more insightful companies see the value of recruiting. You know, you think about the global business case. It's about hiring and retaining talent, because millennials especially want to work for companies that are doing a great job. Sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. It's about innovation. It's about finding, you know, suppliers that represent the communities where you operate. So I think it's really getting the whole organization engaged to own that. And once they do, then they're going to actively start looking for diverse suppliers. Knowing how difficult it is, though, to get as a small business into these large corporations, it's a challenge. And you really have to know what the need is that they're looking for, how you can compete on price, quality, and service to get your foot in the door. But the main thrust of this is having a level playing field where you at least have the opportunity to bid on these things. And I can tell you from my own experience, I've found suppliers that were diverse that did a better job than the incumbent suppliers. So a lot of times procurement people say, well, we already have somebody that's doing a great job. So, well, give us an opportunity because we think we can do an even better job for you. So I know I went around that in a big way, but it's really, it has to come to the bottom line. Companies do this not because they want to be nice. We want them to be doing this because it's about good business.
Right. Well, share what you right before we started this interview, you shared with me an interesting statistic about 85% of women do. Will you share that with the listeners?
Sure. Just within the automotive industry, I learned that women make or influence over 85% of car buying decisions, and they also make 55% of where the cars are serviced of those decisions. So when you think about it, women are very powerful in terms of their buying. And, in most consumer related items, I think it's over 90% women influence those decisions. So I think companies need to pay more attention. And this is global. This is not just the US. This is a global issue. And I think companies need to understand where the future business is going to come from.
Right. That's really smart. How do you personally keep up with trends in this space?
Sure. So there's a lot of other organizations. I work, with WEConnect International. So we do the work with women businesses outside of the U.S., and we have about 100 countries represented where we connect with the women businesses. I work with the other organizations that are in the similar space that focus on women in the U.S. and the LGBT community and the minority business community, and we go to each other's conferences. But there's DevX, a newsletter that comes out every day, just giving us an idea what happens in the world. Axios is one of my feeds. It's a variety of items, but a lot of it is talking to peers. I'm in a great position here with WeConnect because I work with all the corporations that are our members. So I talk to them on a regular basis. I find out what's working, what's not working. So I think the most valuable information comes from each one of them individually. And then, for example, we're looking to become more thought leaders in this space around global supply diversity and inclusion. So we're putting together our second annual symposium to have that discussion on best practices. And this is all new territory. It's one thing to focus on the U.S., which is still important, but outside of the U.S., it's even more challenging. And if you can imagine with women, whether it's in the Middle East or some countries in Africa or Latin America, Asia, there are challenges still. So we work to educate both the women and the corporations.
One piece of advice that I feel I've heard a lot and I've seen a lot recently is get a mentor. And it seems to me that corporations are really focusing on elevating their team members to be mentors, and that vendors have opportunities to become a mentee. Do you see that with the corporations you work for, that there's sort of a trend in that direction?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of companies, and this has actually been an aha moment for me. We were working with one of our members in Latin America and several other countries, and they were using their employee resource groups. There were women senior leadership from those companies to work with and help develop capacity with women businesses and start talking about mentoring. And I think this gives a great opportunity for these corporations to have their local representatives get engaged and give back to the community. So I think it's really a win-win. There's a lot of expertise. And, when you look at the small businesses today, it is incredibly challenging to do business with these large corporations. You not only have to think about IT security, how to market yourself, how to be ahead of the curve. I think it's just really strategically important that you have the interface with those corporations and their mentors that can give you guidance. I wanted to mention one of my favorite books that's been just very recent is called The Anticipatory Organization, written by Daniel Burrus. And he's a futurist. He's written several books, but we've been talking with him for the past few months. And when you think about the world and what's happening in terms of technology changes, in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be an entirely different landscape. There's AI, there's robotics. How are women businesses going to be able to adapt to this different playing field and moving from, the paper world and the old style of doing business to all digital? And so one of our goals is to help train women businesses to anticipate that and be ready for what's coming down the road. So I think it's really important to, think about the future and how we can prepare to be there and not react to it instead.
I think that's really great business advice. One of my other friend, she's a woman business owner. She was mentioning how one of her team members was using so much toner for the copying machine. And I was telling her, like, what on earth is she printing these days that can't just be emailed? And we went through it, and it was a really big expense for her. And she's like, you're right. There's no reason for us to be printing at the level that we were printing. So sometimes it's just those little things as far as what technology can do for you. And then there's bigger things, you're right, with AI and robotics and things like that. So thanks for mentioning that piece.
Sure. One thing that was really interesting too is that, millennials, I think, represent about 40% of procurement professionals now. And I would say that's going to jump over 50% in the next few years.
Okay.
And millennials have a different way of looking at companies and suppliers. And one of the things I learned from one of the conferences I attended, I was waiting in line behind someone else, and the person at the booth said to this woman-owned business, he said, look, don't send me your brochures, send me a 2 to 3 minute video of what you can do for us. And I thought that was really neat, because I think that having quick information and getting a visual and getting a feel for the company through a short video can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that's a really great shift. Now, you to me, although you work for a larger organization, you to me seem very entrepreneurial, and I've been hearing this term intrapreneur. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, but I haven't had a lot of exposure to that world. Yeah. So I'm not as familiar with that as I am the entrepreneurial piece.
What I'm curious to know is, within a larger organization, do you, and if you do, how do you take on projects? How do you veer projects in a direction that you're wanting them to go when maybe the vision isn't exactly that direction? Do you ever have?
Well, I think there's a little bit of politics involved with that. There's no easy answer, but I'd say, first of all, I would always, when you see change happening, I would always volunteer to get on the committee that's working on that change, so that you can play an active role and you're not reacting to whatever is going to come down the pike. Right. And then, always have a good business case and show what the value is, both for short term and long term. So it depends on what the topic is and, how entrenched people are, but you sometimes have to do, I don't know, whether it's going out for drinks after work with a couple of people that might be, against what you're trying to do, and try to find some common ground. But a lot of it is, working together as a group, obviously.
Yeah. I think that building a personal relationship, whether it's going out for drinks or just getting to know the person that you're, trying to get on board, I always think that's really helpful, for sure.
But I think, to answer the entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial question too a little bit, I think all corporations have to think quickly and look for new ideas. So I think it's really incumbent. One of the things that I always try to do is if you're always following the rules in a large organization, you're not going to stand out. You're just going to be like everybody else. And so if you want to really take charge, volunteer for things, get involved, let people know what you believe, take on projects that nobody else wants to do. And that's how you can really strengthen your position. And then you get the respect, and then people will listen to you more.
I love that, take on a project no one else wants to do. Like, that's an easy, low-hanging fruit one.
Yeah.
So
it's so simple.
Right? Do that. As we wrap up, my last question is for you. As an industry insider, what's on your radar right now that you think is a trend or will be a hot topic that we're all talking about in another year or two from now?
I think it'll be robotics and AI. Even the recent show they had with the technology in Las Vegas, I think people came back really excited about all the trends, whether it's self-driving cars or having mini robots at home. And I think even AI, I was reading that there are programs now that can replace lawyers and attorneys in just writing and reading contracts.
Oh, wow.
So you know that's going to have a very significant impact to us, and how are we going to adapt? If you can imagine self-driving cars, self-driving taxis, buses, trucks, ships, tractors, and all the robotics that go along with that, the costs will come down on a lot of the things that we use, and it will give us more leisure time. And then what are we going to do with that leisure time? So it's just, that's why I love that book, The Anticipatory Organization, to kind of think through a little bit, what does that mean to my business, to my world, and what can I do?
That's really cool. Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being here, Michael. I appreciate it.
Sure. My pleasure.